Hey, it's Mazzy here. This video is a little different. It's a merging, a fusing of topics and styles of the videos I do. It's a little bit of a memory of a vinyl junkie, my history in San Francisco. It's about one of my favorite bands, one of my favorite British bands of all time, The Who. And it's about a book that came out this year that the author sent me and the publisher sent me, but I have had other books by this author. So I want to show you the book that I'm going to refer to in this video for the most part. And this is The Who at Winterland, 1968 and 1976. I'll get into that. I'm going to go through their entire touring history of San Francisco and Bill Graham producing them. This is why Eduardo Gonzalini, he authored this book. He's an Italian archivist, a researcher. There's some pretty interesting things in here, including some fan stories, fan photos, journalist interviews. There's an interview with a photographer and writer from Guitar Player magazine with John Entwistle. Before I get into this, and we'll get into this back and forth with me showcasing the music of The Who during this period and my personal stories of seeing The Who 5 times in San Francisco during this. To me, they're 1967 through 1976 is really the period of The Who that matters to me. Now, that's obviously after that is when Keith Moon died and they became something a little different, not to take away from their later touring. I never saw them post Keith Moon's life. Keith Moon and I happened to share the exact same birthday on August 23rd. I think it's kind of cool. I'm probably not as manic as Keith Moon, but this is an excellent book, and I'll show you parts of it. He also wrote another book on The Who. This is Concert Memories from the Classic Years, 1964 to 1976, again, up through Keith Moon's time with them. This is kind of a cool book, too. A lot of photographs, a lot of rare photographs, a lot of memories of people who were at some of the shows in terms of their concerts. So if you're a fan of The Who, obviously, and if you're a fan of their touring and the live shows around this classic period, these are cool books. One other book I'll just mention that I have of his is Cream, Clapton, Bruce, and Baker Sitting on Top of the World. This is San Francisco, February, March 1968, primarily the Winterland and Fillmore shows. Those of you who know the great album with a beautiful metallic foil cover, Wheels of Fire, one record in the studio with White Room, one record live recorded at Bill Graham's Winterland and Fillmore West. Just a fantastic live venue, and this gets into the recordings and the shows and details about it. But again, I'm not here to showcase Cream, but I do love that album. Those first 3-4 records to me of Cream are top notch. So let me talk about my history with The Who first. It started with the single My Generation. I believe that was the first single, 45, I ever bought of The Who. And I mean, what a great, great song. One of the great classic songs of the 1960s. Of course, we can go into a little later, I Can See for Miles, and why didn't that become a bigger hit? I mean, to me, that is a perfect psychedelic song of the 1960s. But the songs that really I kind of started latching on to them, and this is the first album I got. Of course, the song Happy Jack, there's a quirkiness to that. I think around this time, I also got into Magic Bus, and I loved, the wood blocks and that part of it. But Happy Jack had a certain sing-song sound that like a young lad would get into. And of course, the kitsch on here of Boris the Spider, and of course a quick one while he's away. Of course, in the UK, this came out as the quick one. This is how it was released in America on Decca Records in America. And I just love this record. This is my original copy. One of the few records that I own, originals, that's kind of worn. Not quite sure why this over my other collection, but it's a fantastic record. And that really sort of solidified The Who for me until 1967, of course, when this album came out. And I bought this album. I thought the cover was hysterical. I love the mix of those kind of faux / real commercials, them doing parodies of commercials that would be on the BBC back in the day, or radio Caroline, Radio London, all those kind of things. I just love this record. And as I said earlier, I Can See for Miles, probably one of the most perfect singles ever released. This should have been a bigger hit than it was. And the irony is, in America, it wasn't that big. They weren't that huge around this time. I mean, they had a cult following. They were part of the, post-British invasion after the Stones and the Beatles and the Kinks and Dave Clark Five. So the first visit to San Francisco was in 1967, and of course Monterey down south of San Francisco, and those great shows at the Fillmore. I did not attend those. I didn't see The Who for the first time till 1969. But this concentrates on 1968 now. So in February 1968, just 2 months after this album comes out, and it's not really a hit, as I said, in the States. It had sort of a cult following. FM stations, they weren't all over it like they would be later during their really anthemic period, maybe even Tommy to begin with. They came and they played the Fillmore and Winterland in 1968, 3 months after that came out. And this is kind of where this book really leaves off. Now, it does have a preface and talks about the shows they did in San Francisco, the history in San Francisco with Bill Graham. Bill Graham was a big supporter of them and really mixed up his shows a lot at both the Fillmore and Winterland, not just with The Who, but with all the artists that were playing there. He was a great promoter mixing genres. And of course, in 1968, he had Cannonball Adderley with Joe Zawinul was on that bill, and Nate Adderley, Cannonball's brother, that great sound. He had Mercy, Mercy. Mercy was a radio hit, the great jazz kind of crossover hit for Cannonball Adderley. The Nice with Keith Emerson prior to Emerson, Lake and Palmer open up, and a band, The Vagrants. Handbill from 1968. What a beautiful handbill that is. I don't have a full poster of this. I didn't go to this show. But the poster art here was really a great thing happening then. Of course, all the poster art for the shows that Bill Graham produced at the Fillmore and Winterland, of course, and Chet Helms used a lot of the same poster artists for the Avalon. And I'm surprised, actually. Maybe it was a deal or a gentleman's agreement or something. The Who never performed at the Avalon Ballroom, which was another great venue in San Francisco. There was a little bit of a heated competition, but I think it was good because there was so much going on in San Francisco. I'm a little still on the young period here, 13 years old, so I wasn't really going out to ballrooms quite yet. But this gets into the various shows at these ballrooms. And here's an interview, a lost interview, as I said earlier, with John Entwistle. That was backstage for Guitar Player magazine with John Entwistle by Steve Carraway, a photographer and a writer. This is a photograph of Winterland, which was originally Dreamland. I used to go there with my parents, which was a venue for the Ice Capades and the Ice Follies. And there's different sections of each show. There's Winterland 1968. This is the story and photos from the February 23rd. And he brings in a hell of a lot of amazing shots that I've never seen before of these photographs of the Winterland shows. Again, this book concentrates on Winterland, even though they played Fillmore quite a bit in San Francisco. But I just love that he concentrated on this, and it really is a wonderful overview if you're a Who fan, or even for me, again, as my history of San Francisco, my love of this music of San Francisco, this is essential for my personal collection, and I love it. My personal story of seeing The Who starts in May of 1969, when I went into a store called Portals to Music in the Stonestown Shopping Center by San Francisco State College. There was a guy, bushy, kind of medium length hair there, that I used to see all the time, and we knew each other by face, and I went in there and I bought this record. Not this exact copy, this is a later classic audiophile copy of Tommy, but this, as I said, this and Who Sell Out trade off of my favorite Who album. I love this record. So I'm talking to the guy at the shop, and he says, The Who are coming in a few weeks to the Fillmore West. I had never been to the Fillmore West. We chatted about The Who. He was so in love with this record. The guy who sold to me, his name is Roy Loney. He was a member, unbeknownst to me at the time, a member of the Flamin' Groovies that would put out their first record in 1969. I didn't know him. The irony is, 8 years, 9 years later in 1978, we would work together at ABC Records. He was a promo guy at ABC, and we worked together. Then I would see him for on and off for years with the Roy Lonely and the Phantom Movers. But he's the one that pushed me into buying my first ticket to see The Who. So I was 14 years old. This is the poster from that Fillmore West show. Again, as I mentioned, how Bill Graham really liked to mix up genres and acts. The Who, Woody Herman and his orchestra opening for The Who. Also on the bill, A.B. Sky, that kind of blues rock band. But this is the Fillmore West, The Who at the Fillmore West. Poster from that show. The next year in 1970, they came and played the Berkeley Community Theater, another venue that I went to a lot. For whatever reason, I didn't see The Who that year, and I didn't go to the show. Not sure why. Of course, Who Live at Leeds sort of is really the representative of that year in that show. Has this great poster at Leeds. Just is a fantastic live album. One of the greatest rock live albums. And I even like the later expanded, I think it came out like 5 years ago, 3 LP set that has the entire show, including the songs from Tommy that they would play for a number of years around this time, which was great. Even though this isn't my favorite Who album, I can't deny the powerfulness, the importance of this record. This is the record that really broke the Who in America and around the world beyond this cult band of the 1960s. Tommy obviously brought them in the forefront. They became more important, an art rock band, a powerful band, a little psychedelia, a little more intelligentsia of British rock and roll, especially with the great writings of Pete Townsend. But after Woodstock in 1969, and then this, Who really kind of solidified. Of course, Woodstock came out in 1970. That pushed them in the forefront, and this just followed it up completely. This came out in 1971. The end of that year in 1971, I saw The Who at the Civic Auditorium, which is right by the City Hall in San Francisco. Not a great venue sound-wise, but a larger venue than the club. I don't like the sound there, but I love this show. Of course, when the box set came out recently on this, there was a live recording from that show. I was disappointed with the sound of that. It was very bootleg-like, considering Glenn Johns had a mobile studio there and they recorded. I'm surprised of the sound of that release. I'm not getting into that too much here, but this was a fantastic album, and that show, again, powerful as hell in 1971, San Francisco Civic Auditorium. Even though Eduardo's book concentrates on these Winterland shows in 1968 and 1976, with these great photographs, great performance shots in the book, it does have a interlude here, if you will, the years between. These are the years that the Who came to San Francisco, in between those two, like sandwich, the meat inside the sandwich between 1968 and 1976. I was working in record stores when this came out, so this was the first album that came out while I was working in a record store. This is a record that you really have to confront. This is a record that a lot of people love. I don't know why I do, but I always compare this, not musically, but there's a certain intensity, a certain aesthetic, a certain massiveness. I compare it to the Pink Floyd's The Wall. Musically, nothing alike. I think why I do this, because both of these albums, Quadrophenia and The Wall, seem completely overbaked to me. There's a lot of stuff on this that's great. There's a lot of beautiful songs, beautiful production, beautiful work on this and The Wall. But for some reason, there's things that just don't work for me personally. I'm in the minority. I know a lot of people will say that Quadrophenia is their favorite Who album if it's not Who's Next. I tend to go with the later 60s stuff. Same with The Wall. A lot of people just love The Wall. It's a personal take, but maybe because I worked it at the time, I played it, I tried to get into it. I do like it, but I don't love it. The stuff I love is high. The stuff I kind of think is a little too much is low for me, for my personal take. Again, we all have our loves and our dislikes and our things that we think are a little not as just poignant to me. I understand the whole story behind this and everything about it. I saw the film, but it's just for some reason it's overbaked, it's bloated to me. And sometimes I used to say it's a bloated mess, and I'd get people attacking me for that comment. But that's just a personal take. If you like it, all the power to you. This came out in October 1973, and I went to that November show in 1973 at the Cow Palace. He mentions that in here. Eduardo talks about that in between. And now that was a complete shit show. I was at the Cow Palace with my friend Larry Weinberg. If you watch my videos before, you see there's a drum set here. My buddy died in a little over 10 years ago in San Francisco, just before I moved from San Francisco to Seattle. And as a gift to me, she asked me if I wanted anything, and I said I wanted his drum set and I would buy it. But she gifted me Larry's drum set, and that's what I have here. When we were kids, we played in bands together. We were both drummers in junior high school together in the, quote, orchestra, the band. But we wanted to start a band because we were friends. So I quit the drums and I picked up a guitar, and literally a month later we had a band. And so Larry as a drummer means a lot to me historically, in terms of my history. And in 1973, we went to that show to see The Who at the Cow Palace. And we were sitting at the back. Downstairs was kind of open. I don't remember if everyone was standing there or there were chairs, but we were in this slightly elevated seating area, kind of the back. And it's a long venue. Back in 1960, I believe the Republican National Convention was in San Francisco at the Cow Palace. It's a good-sized venue. The Beatles played there early on. I saw Neil Young there. I've seen so many shows. Wings Over America tour happened there, as well as George Harrison's Dark Horse tour. So I knew the venue, and I would go to the venue for a number of years. It wasn't my favorite place. I think I saw the Allman Brothers on a New Year's Eve show there as well around this time, maybe 73 or so. But we went to see The Who, and they were really good. However, we all know the infamous story that early on in the show, I don't remember how long it was, half hour, 45 minutes, hour into it. You can look it up and find out before I do, again, and tell me in the comments. But Keith Moon keels over. They attributed it to jet lag. We don't know at this point, or at that point, what it was. And then he came back and he played again, and then Keith Moon keeled over, passed out again. And that's when Pete Townsend said, "Are there any drummers in the audience?" I literally grabbed Larry by the collar, and we tried to work our way down, but we were like a football field away from the stage. We barely got down to the stage, and this guy gets up on the stage and gets up there. Turns out the guy's name was Scott Halpin. He died several years ago, but he's one of those great answers to a trivia question. He played several songs with The Who, and they called it a day. It was a shit show of a concert. It was a show that everyone talked about. I'm kind of thankful I went to it, but it wasn't a great musical experience. It was more of a rock and roll event. So that is the 1973 experience of Quadrophenia and The Who. I don't know if that's why it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, that show. I don't think so, but I'll just leave it at that. Now let's jump 2.5 years to 1976. The Who played 2 nights at Winterland. I went to both shows. Huge demand for tickets, way more than they had. It was one of those that sold out in minutes. You'd send in an envelope. But I don't remember exactly how I got the second pair of tickets. This is a period I was working in a record store. I might have had a connection. But I went to both shows at Winterland in 1976. And this was a fantastic show. Now remember, this was a period of time. Winterland holds, 5,000 plus people, and they had, 10 times that many requests. But this is a time when The Who were playing these large stadiums. They played Wembley in the UK. They play these huge arenas, literally larger places. And part of it was a sentimentality and connection with Bill Graham. I think, as I recall, I remember it was sort of an apology or a thank you or a gift to San Francisco to play these shows at Winterland in a smaller venue because of the debacle 2.5 years earlier at the Cow Palace when Keith Moon happened. What's nice about this, the book shows photographs of the time of waiting in line. I remember these days of waiting in line at Winterland in San Francisco. You'd sit around the neighborhoods, the great old Victorian flats. This is on Steiner, just a few blocks from Japantown. There is the show there. The marquee at Winterland, The Who, Steve Gibbons. I don't even remember Steve Gibbons, to be honest with you. I might have missed Steve Gibbons, but I just don't remember at all. He has photographs here of the load-in, the production of that. It's kind of great. Again, it's a geeked out version of all the setups, setting up the gear, photographs of the concert, the various shows at Winterland. Winterland 1976, these great shows of The Who. You know, I used to take my camera to Winterland a lot. You've seen in my channel some things, but by this point I'd stopped. Again, I'm not going to go through every spread here, but it gives you an idea what these were about. It's just a wonderful pictorial about this show. And they have the next show here in 1976. So each day he chronicles the performances. It's a great archival piece, a great archival book, and it's a really interesting document of the Who in San Francisco. And I understand obsession with music and shows, and it seems like Eduardo, someone who seemingly is at least 30 years younger than me, really like hooked on to the Who, and especially these shows in San Francisco. Again, this one has a foreword by Joel Sullivan, who I've known somewhat over the years, the great Chronicle music critic for years, and written a bunch of great books. So he wrote the introduction because he was at those early 1967 shows at the Fillmore. But again, this book, Teenage Wasteland, Eduardo Genzolini, really concentrates on these Winterland shows in 1968 and 1976, but it does take us through the history of them and the connection that the Who had with Bill Graham and San Francisco performances. And no way could I showcase this music and these shows without inserting my personal experiences, seeing those great shows. That, first of all, my first trip to the Fillmore West to see Tommy, then 1971, the Civic Auditorium, and then 1973, the Cow Palace, and again twice at Winterland in 1976. 1976, for some reason, is the one I really remember the sound being really good. The great thing about Bill Graham around this time, and especially earlier on, I guess in the late 60s, he really wanted it to be a great experience for not just the performer, but for the audience. I mean, he gave us, you know, a lot. He gave us a lot of value early on, 3-4 acts on a bill, mixed genres. We would be turned on to jazz and to country and to blues with his bills at the San Francisco Fillmore, Fillmore West, and Winterland, and then Berkeley Community Theater and other venues. He had good sound PA systems more than a lot of other venues of the day early on. He did a show on time and a wonderful experience. And all the bullshit about Bill Graham, and he definitely has a history and some intensity in his persona, he did it right. He really wanted to do it right. And growing up in San Francisco and going to these shows, he's, to me, was part of the soul of San Francisco on the music scene in the 1960s and 1970s, into the 80s and into early 90s before he died. So thanks for watching again, and thanks for this book again, Eduardo. Mazzy loves you. We'll see you next time.